Alright, so I'm going to be doing my fourth review now. This is going to be my review of Season of Changes by the Brian Blade and the Fellowship Band. I said back in my first review, a review of the Fellowship Band's album Landmarks, that I was probably going to be getting around to this eventually, and now I am, 9 months later. And yeah, let's just get really into it. I've been really looking forward to getting this one done. Season of Changes was one of the first albums that I really got into in contemporary jazz. So it impacted me a lot in how I viewed it opened up my horizons to another type, more forms of music once I started listening to it. More ways of taking what we call jazz. Excuse me. So to the album itself, the Season of Changes is a 2008 album. It's by Brian Blade and the Fellowship Band. The personnel are Brian Blade on drums, Melvin Butler on tenor saxophone, Myron Walden on alto saxophone and bass clarinet, John Cowherd on piano and keys, Kurt Rosenwinkel on guitar, and Chris Thomas on bass. This album, 2008, was a point where the Fellowship Band had been around for a bit, over a decade. But it's still, from my perspective, relatively on the earlier side of their musical career. It's still in the middle, but it's on the earlier side of their musical career. That band's been around for a while. Brian Blade's been putting out that type of music for a while, and it really has not shifted a significant amount in the time that he's been putting it out. And Season of Changes is interesting, being kind of in the middle to earlier kind of part of their discography, in that it really does, it's really the perfect, in my view, it's really the perfect encapsulation of what the Fellowship Band's sound is. It is, Season of Changes really shows exactly what their kind of wholesome, like, it's a very unique sound. I don't know how to call it besides the Fellowship's Band sound. It's this very unique sound, and it comes out very clearly on Season of Changes without really any other interruptions. And sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes that's a bad thing. So to get to that, Season of Changes, at least when I started listening to it, when you're kind of in your first listen, it's really nice, and you have all this kind of really great sound, some great playing from Kurt Rosenwinkel on guitar. He gets a lot of featuring, especially in the first half of the album. It's this kind of like bright but soulful arrangements with some nice horn lines with the bass clarinet and the saxophone. Some absolutely beautiful blending within the two horns, but also just the band as a whole. Just there's no distinct changes. The bass clarinet comes out so beautifully with the saxophone and the rest of the band. Everything, they just merge as a band so well. And that's kind of like the sense you get at the beginning, is you get all that kind of great sound, and also the songs, even when they're like 3 to 4 to 5 minutes long, have these wonderful arcs throughout them. They have these wonderful arcs which they're somehow able to manage to put together with such short amount of time. The way that they start with a theme and they'll go into something else and then they'll kind of end back on it. It's really amazing how Brian Blade does that. And that really stays for a while at the beginning, but those first few songs really all sound, they do that all every time. They all sound very similar. They all have this wholesome kind of sound, and it tires on your ears, to be honest. And they started out at a certain kind of like point, and they take it out a bit more into some more unique stuff on Return to the Prodigal Son, the second song. And then it just kind of gets back to the basics with Stoner Hill, which is a good song. Don't get me wrong, I love the song, but as an album, the main theme I think that I'm going to be having to say with this is that as an album, this album is one of the things I said about Landmarks was that the album had all these kind of weird tracks on it every once in a while that were very short and were just not necessary, and were kind of just like trying to put some form to the album but weren't doing it well. Season of Changes is the opposite. There is no interruptions for like the whole first half. It's just the same thing going. The album is very cohesive in the sense that there's never any big changes, but there's never any big changes. It's just the same thing, and it keeps going. And I would have loved some breaks, and I think on Landmarks that's what the Blade was trying to work on, but I think he took it a bit too far into just doing too much weird stuff. I would love if the Fellowship Band was just able to find a different sound. They really stick with the same sound a lot, and I would love if they could expand into some new sounds for their group. because the current one's great, but it was like it's all they've got. And I know this isn't a review of just Season of Changes, but I found this to be the case with a lot of their music, is that they've really got this one sound, and that's kind of it. I will say, though, where they do change that up, though, is at the end. You make it all the way through all this stuff. Most Precious One starts to kind of change, but it's the same thing. But the last two songs are Alpha Omega Improvisation and Omni. Alpha Omega Improvisation is the song that got me into them originally. Alpha Omega Improvisation is beautiful. It is a complete change up. It is Brian Blade is not even playing drums. He's not even heard playing on the song. But it's beautiful. It's bass clarinet and a pump organ. And it is just some of the most beautiful music I've ever heard. I will say I'm partial to both of those instruments. Those are two of my favorite instruments, is the bass clarinet and pump organs of various kinds. And so I am partial to this song, but it is, I don't know what else to say besides that it is just beautiful. You have to listen to it, even if you don't listen to the rest of the album. It is a wonderful change up in the middle of the album. It switches things up, but when it's over, it's fine. It's over. You don't feel like, oh, I wish there was more. It's just what it should be. How they were able to put together such a track, like, I think I could understand very well. It's not like it's beyond my understanding. It's not a very complex piece. It's not like it's very hard to play the things that they're playing. But the idea behind it, the idea of, like, this is what we're going to do, the idea of the composition of it, the idea of the improvisation that's happening is just fantastic. It doesn't matter how complicated it is to play the music. It's just the ideas are great. The music itself just sounds good. And moving on from there into Omni. Omni changes things up. It goes back to the general sound of the Fellowship Band, like their normal sound, but it changes up the form of the song. This starts with this kind of sax solo at the beginning, which just goes out in a much more jazz sense than some of the other solos. It's much more kind of like going out, and as time goes on, it starts to go like out more into some more complex harmonic stuff. It starts to play. They start to go really out, and the band kind of builds behind them, and it's really nice. It's really good. And also, there's much less of a guitar focus on this song, which was really Kurt Rosenwinkel, who's great, I will say, was focused on almost too much at the beginning of this album. At first, you're like, oh, this is fantastic. But as time goes on, it's just like, oh, we have another Kurt Rosenwinkel feature at the beginning of the song. This song does not have that. You don't even really notice him for the beginning. And he comes in at the end there, but it's just another member of the band. And just overall, the composition of this song, even before the sax solo, there's these opening fermatas which build, and they're just so nice. It's just this building upwards, 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 and it falls back down into that solo. It's fantastic. And another thing that happens great on this song, which is over the whole album, is Brian Blade's drumming. Brian Blade's drumming on this whole album is truly fantastic. He has a style of drumming which I don't really know how to talk about and how to like explain, because on one hand it feels very minimal, but there's also a lot happening. He is able to build like the tension. He's able to build tension and intensity so effectively. He builds it up through like just basic things like waiting and like rolling up and like going and like holding breaks and stuff like that. And it completely makes the tracks on this album. It's what keeps them interesting when a lot of the other instruments are on much more stable parts. And it's really interesting how he composes so that he puts a lot of stability in his pieces, and then he is able to like go out a lot more and really play with a lot more tension and rhythmic stuff, because he's not forced into keeping beats. He's not forced into that like 2 and 4 hi-hat. He's not forced into anything that is like holding him down into like one beat. He's able to do this like crazy stuff where he'll like not be playing for a bit, like a short amount of time there he's not playing, and it doesn't feel like anything crazy is happening. It just feels like tension's building. It doesn't feel like we're in like a state of like free fall. It feels like we're going somewhere, like we're building up. Brian Blade's drumming is just truly fantastic on this record. It's just his sound, everything he is playing. It's fantastic. And just to the playing of musicians on here, I've said already, but Kurt Rosenwinkel puts out some fantastic playing on this record. Great solos, great parts when there's parts written for him. The way that they're able to throw him into the band was really effective and surprising. I wouldn't have expected his guitar to fit in so well into this like two reeds, bass, drums, and piano setting. But it works really well. It's individually on individual songs, I'm sure it's great. And like when I listen to them individually, it's great. Over the whole album, it just gets very tiring at the beginning because there's just so much of his focus. The two reed players both have some fantastic solos, and their blending, as I've said before, is heavenly. They just like for the years that they've been playing together, they have managed to have a beautiful sound together, and it's wonderful. And the bass clarinet on this in the Fellowship Band makes the Fellowship Band what it is. That sound of bass clarinet and alto sax blending is just so beautiful, and nobody else does it as so well. I've honestly like the bass clarinet's use in this group is what I wish we had a lot more of in jazz and just in music in general. It's prominent, it's featured, and it doesn't seem weird at all. There's a lot of bass clarinet, of course, in other forms of jazz and stuff. You have Eric Dolphy was a major bass clarinetist, and he's kind of the big one that we hear about in jazz, and after that it kind of falls off, but you have people who pull it out every once in a while, like Chris Potter, but it's always kind of more of a unique thing. It's whenever they have a unique thing, and Eric Dolphy, all of his music was already very unique. It's wonderful to just hear the bass clarinet used for just its nice sound, just all the time, just used in multiple circumstances. So that's wonderful. The bass playing, I really didn't notice too much. Whenever I was trying to listen to it, it was a lot of just the way that the songs are written, they don't call for a lot of like crazy stuff from the bassist. He does what he needs to. And then John Cowherd on keys puts down some pretty cool stuff. He's not as featured on this recording as he is on some others, like Landmarks, where he's almost has the Kurt Rosenwinkel problem over there. But he always plays his parts really well. Gets these really solid grooves that are just really nice to have. And so yeah, the recording overall, just to wrap this up, I enjoyed it. It's been one that's been pretty central to my understanding of just the various ways that jazz can go and the boundaries of jazz, the extents of jazz. And it's a really interesting record. I would just like to reiterate that as an album overall, it's kind of grating, especially at the beginning. It's just so much of the same. But once it gets into the end, it really just it's nice. It's nice to have that change, and it gets really good. And individually on individual songs are just they're fantastic. They are just really fantastic. The only downside is, as I've said before so many times, it's just it gets boring at the beginning there. If I had to give this a rating, which I do, I'm telling myself I have to give this a rating. I believe I'd probably go with a. I think I'd go with a. I'll give it a 7 out of 10. I'll give this album a 7 out of 10. Alright, thanks for watching. I'll hopefully be getting back to getting some more reviews out. Who knows? Maybe it'll be another 9 months. Hopefully not a year. Maybe another few in the next few days. Alright, thanks for watching.